The house creaked the way old houses do when the weather turns colder, like it's remembering every winter that's come before. I sat by the kitchen window, watching flakes drift across the empty road, waiting for the phone to ring. Before we continue, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the bell icon so you never miss a story like this one. It was the 23rd of December. In our family, that date had always meant one thing: the call. The one where my daughter, Lauren, would ask what kind of pie I wanted to bring, what sweater I'd wear, whether I could arrive early to help hang the ornaments her mother had left behind. I could almost hear her voice, brisk and bright, a little too busy for tenderness, but still mine. The call never came. Instead, sometime after dusk, my phone buzzed with a message, a neat, apologetic paragraph from my son-in-law, Adrian. "Hey, Harold, hope you're keeping warm. We're keeping things small this year, just immediate family. We'll swing by after the holidays." I read it twice. Immediate family. I suppose a man stops being that once he's paid off the mortgage. The kitchen clock ticked loudly. The scent of pine needles from the small tree in the corner couldn't quite fill the emptiness that text left behind. For a moment, I thought about calling Lauren myself, pretending I hadn't seen the message. But pride is a quiet thing. It doesn't shout. It just settles in your chest like frost. I poured another cup of coffee and sat back. The mug was one of the old ones, chipped blue ceramic, Maggie's favorite. She used to joke that coffee tasted better when shared. I lifted it toward the empty chair across from me. "Guess it's just us again, Mag." Outside, lights twinkled from the house across the street. Doris Klein was decorating her porch railings, humming off-key to some carol I couldn't place. I envied her noise. I scrolled through old photos on my phone. Lauren at 7, front teeth missing. At 16, holding a science fair ribbon. At 25, in her wedding dress, beaming. In each picture, she was standing in front of something I'd built. The fence, the gazebo, the house she now called her own. I'd built her entire world one paycheck at a time. And somehow, in doing so, I'd built a distance too. When the clock struck 9, I turned off the light and let the house go dark. The quiet pressed in, familiar and heavy. Somewhere in the distance, laughter carried from a party. Warm, easy laughter. I told myself it wasn't hers, though deep down I already knew it was. I went to bed with the phone on the nightstand, screen facing down. Hope is stubborn. It lingers even when you tell it to leave. The next morning, snow had covered the steps. I shoveled out of habit. No one to impress, no guest expected, just muscle memory from a life built around showing up. Each scrape of the shovel sounded like an apology no one had asked for. By afternoon, I decided to drive into town for groceries. The store speakers played, "Have Yourself a Merry Little Christmas," and I almost laughed at the irony. On the way out, I ran into Doris again. She smiled warmly. "Harold, you going to your daughter's place this year?" I hesitated just long enough for her smile to fade. "Not this time, Doris." She frowned. "That's a shame. I heard they're having quite a gathering. Saw a catering van there earlier." Her words landed softly but cut deep. I nodded, pretending it didn't matter. Guess the world spins fine without me. That night, I lit the fireplace and sat with a notebook. Maggie had always said I wrote better when something was broken inside me. I wrote a single line. "If they don't need you, maybe it's time to stop being needed." The wind rattled the windows. The house groaned again as if agreeing. The morning light came through the curtains in long, cold stripes, touching the dust that hung in the air. I'd left the heat low overnight. Old habit, I suppose, from years of stretching every dollar. When you've lived long enough alone, you stop pretending. Comfort is a necessity. The silence in this house is particular. It's not the kind that follows noise. It's the kind that's learned to exist all on its own. I made breakfast the way Maggie used to. 2 eggs, black coffee, no toast, because she'd always forget to buy bread. It's been 6 years, and still I set her cup out next to mine. Not out of grief anymore. more like respect for the ghost of routine. On the mantel above the fireplace, her photo watched over me. I'd taken it the year Lauren graduated college. Maggie's hair caught the wind just right, the sun wrapping her face in that same soft light she always carried into a room. "We did good," she'd said that day, eyes on our daughter in her cap and gown. "She's got our spirit." Funny how pride can turn into distance when time does its work. After breakfast, I wandered the house. Every step echoed just a little too long. The hallway smelled faintly of cedar from the old dresser we'd refinished together. In the living room, the floor still creaked where Maggie's recliner had been. These are the little ghosts no one tells you about, the ones that don't haunt you out loud, but in whispers. I found myself standing by the window, watching the same neighborhood I'd known for 40 years. Kids on bicycles, mail truck rumbling down the street, wind tugging at the frozen wreath on Doris Klein's door. She was outside, bundled in a red scarf, waving at the postman with that unstoppable cheer of hers. And Doris always knew how to keep moving forward. She spotted me and gave a small wave through the glass. I waved back. Sometimes that little gesture feels like a rope tossed across an empty ocean. I turned away, picked up a stack of old letters from the desk. Bills, bank statements, holiday cards from cousins who hadn't visited in decades. And then one photo slipped out from between them. Lauren, maybe 9 years old, grinning wide while holding a crooked gingerbread house. I remember that night, vividly. She'd stayed up late, frosting her fingers in the countertop more than the candy walls. Maggie laughed until she cried. I'd promised then that Christmas would always be about us three, no matter how old we got. Promises are fragile things. They sound strong when you make them. They break quietly. By afternoon, I tried reading but couldn't keep my focus. Every paragraph faded into memory. I thought of Lauren's text again. Immediate family. The phrase rolled through my mind like a pebble caught in a dryer, soft, constant, impossible to ignore. I walked into the garage where the smell of motor oil and sawdust clung to everything. My workbench was still cluttered with tools I hadn't touched in years. Hanging above it, the blueprint of the first house I ever built. Lauren's. I'd spent 2 summers working double shifts to pay for that lot, watching her run through the framing while Maggie called her the little foreman. I traced the lines of the design with my finger. Walls, doors, a roof that once meant safety. All of it ours until one day it wasn't. That house, the one she and Adrian live in now, was my masterpiece. Not in its architecture, but in what it represented. Stability, sacrifice, love turned into lumber and nails. I'd signed over the title 5 years ago. The bank kept me on as a guarantor. Lauren had insisted it was just a formality. At the time, I believed her. Now I realized how easily love can turn you into an accessory. Around 4, I went out to shovel again. The snow was heavier now, wet and clinging. Doris came to her fence, holding a thermos. "Coffee?" she called out. "Already had 3, I said. She laughed. "Then make it 4. You look frozen." She poured some into a cup and handed it over. The steam curled between us. "You heading anywhere for Christmas, Harold?" she asked. "Not this year." She nodded slowly as if she already knew. Sometimes the quiet holidays are the ones that tell you the most truth. She was right, though I didn't tell her that. That night, I turned off the lights early. The tree glowed faintly in the corner, the ornaments dull from age. Maggie's favorite, the glass cardinal, hung near the top. I sat in my armchair, letting the house breathe around me. There was a certain peace in solitude, until you realize peace and emptiness can look a lot alike. Before bed, I wrote again in the notebook. It isn't anger, it's realization. Maybe the hardest part of love is knowing when it stopped being mutual. I closed it, placed it under the lamp, and let the dark settle in. Somewhere between the stillness and the wind, the house whispered back an answer only I could hear. "She'll learn, Harold. One way or another, she'll learn." The snow hadn't stopped for 2 days. It softened everything. The fences, the driveways, even the sound of disappointment that had been echoing through my chest since that message came. By Christmas Eve morning, I'd grown used to the stillness. The quiet had settled into the walls like insulation. I spent the early hours reading the paper, marking crossword puzzles I wouldn't finish, and trying not to think about the fact that I had nowhere to be. Then came the sound that broke it. Laughter. Faint at first, muffled by the storm. Then louder. I stood at the window, coffee cooling in my hand. Across the street, cars began to line both sides of Lauren's driveway. Sleek sedans, black SUVs, bright coats stepping out into the snow. I watched a catering truck pull up, its logo shimmering in the headlights. The driver jumped down, carrying boxes that smelled faintly of roasted rosemary and sugar glaze. "Small family gathering," Adrian had written. My fingers tightened around the cup until the porcelain squeaked. A few minutes later, I saw her, Lauren, my daughter. She came out onto the porch wearing a silver dress that shimmered even through the snowfall, her hair pinned, her heels too high for the ice. She greeted guests with the same polished smile she used to practice in front of Maggie's mirror. I remembered when she used to wear knitted scarves and mismatched mittens, when she'd run down the same porch steps barefoot to catch snowflakes on her tongue. Now she was unrecognizable, every movement curated, every laugh rehearsed. I turned away before anyone could glance this direction. I didn't blame her for wanting better things. I blamed myself for teaching her that better always meant different. By noon, the street was full. The scent of grilled lamb and baked bread drifted through the air. Music followed, soft jazz, expensive and soulless. I heard the clinking of glasses and the deep, practiced laugh of Adrian Reed, the man who had built his confidence on the back of other people's effort. Doris knocked on my door sometime later, cheeks red from the cold. "Harold, you seen this?" I opened the door halfway. "Hard to miss." She frowned. "They told everyone you were spending Christmas in Seattle, that you sold the house." I blinked. "Sold it?" "That's what Adrian said to the caterer. Guess it sounds better than we didn't invite him." Her voice carried sympathy, but it hit like a nail all the same. I forced a smile. "I suppose every good party needs a story." She shook her head. "You deserve better than this." "I had better," I said quietly. "Once." Doris hesitated as if wanting to say more, then simply touched my arm. "You come by later if you want company." After she left, I went back to the window. Inside Lauren's house, shadows moved past the windows. Glimpses of laughter, movement, heat. The opposite of everything my home had become. I went to the garage and found the box I'd labeled Old Blueprints. I dragged it to the table, brushing away the dust. Dozens of rolled papers tumbled out. Homes I'd designed, built, repaired. Lives I'd helped shape one nail, one beam at a time. And there, among them, the one that mattered. The first draft of the house across the street. Lauren's house, my handwriting, the measurements in pencil. Maggie's note in the margin. At a bay window. She'll love watching the snow. I traced the line where that window should be, the same one I was now staring through as strangers laughed under its light. I tried to convince myself that this wasn't betrayal, that children grow and parents fade. That's the natural order. But nature never accounted for the ache that comes when love turns into obligation. By evening, the music had gotten louder. I could hear Adrian's voice rise above the chatter. "Lauren deserves the best. We worked hard for this." The irony made me laugh under my breath. I put on my coat and stepped outside. The night air was sharp, the snow crunching underfoot. I walked slowly, stopping at the edge of my driveway where my property met the road. From there, I could see the lights glittering through their front window. One of the guests, a man in a suit I didn't recognize, looked out, saw me standing there, and quickly looked away. He whispered something to Lauren. She glanced toward the window, froze for half a heartbeat, then turned her back. I'd been erased, politely, efficiently. I went back inside, heart steady, not broken, just colder. That's when I realized something important. I didn't need to shout, Didn't need to make a scene. Didn't even need to be angry. I just needed to remember what was mine and what was borrowed. Later that night, as the party lights dimmed across the street, I opened Maggie's old music box, the one that hadn't played in years. It creaked, a hesitant tune rising between the gears. I sat there in the glow of the fireplace and whispered into the dark. She's forgotten where she came from, Mag. Maybe it's time she remembered. The melody went on, thin and haunting, until it ended on a note that didn't quite resolve. Neither did I. I woke before dawn the next morning, long before the world outside decided to start moving again. The snow had stopped sometime in the night, leaving the street washed in a hard, brittle silence, the kind that makes even memory sound too loud. The coffee pot hissed softly as I stood by the counter. Across the street, Lauren's house was dark. No laughter, no cars, just the hollow stillness that always follows after people have had their fill of celebration. I wondered if she thought of me at all while she stood there among those glittering lights. Then I told myself it didn't matter. People who forget your presence rarely remember your absence either. I walked back to the garage where the box of blueprints still sat on the workbench. The air smelled faintly of metal and old pine. My fingertips traced over rolls of paper like they were old wounds. That's when I saw it, a small envelope tucked between the plans. My handwriting, from years ago. Mortgage, Benton residence. I unfolded it. Inside was the first loan agreement for Lauren's home. My name, printed clear as day, alongside hers and Adrian's. Co-signer, Harold Benton. I'd forgotten about that part, or maybe I'd forced myself to. For years, I'd made sure their payments went through, even during Adrian's business transitions, as he called them. Maggie used to warn me, "Love her, but don't carry her forever." I never listened. You don't think about the cost of devotion when it's your child you're saving. I spread the rest of the papers across the bench. There were the building permits, the contractor's invoices, and tucked between them, a letter from Maggie written in her round, steady script. "If something ever happens to me, promise me you'll keep helping Lauren, but not at the expense of your peace." Peace. I couldn't remember the last time I'd felt that word mean anything. I sat down, the stool creaking under my weight. The garage light flickered. For a long time, I didn't move. I just stared at that contract, the signature that had tied me to them not as a father, but as a safety net. Somewhere above the ceiling, the furnace clicked on. The sound reminded me of the years I'd spent fixing machines, always knowing how to patch metal, but never learning how to mend people. That evening, Doris dropped by with a casserole, uninvited as usual. "You shouldn't be alone on Christmas Eve," she said, setting it on the counter. "I've had worse nights," I told her. She looked around the kitchen. I doubt that. We sat at the table, eating quietly. Doris had that way of talking without speaking. Her company filled the room enough to make the silence bearable. After a while, she said, "You know, my son stopped calling me last year. I mailed him a Christmas card anyway. He never answered, but it still made me feel like a mother." I nodded. "We keep giving even when no one's taking." She smiled sadly. "Because that's what love does, but sometimes love has to change its shape." After she left, I stayed at the table, her words bouncing around my head, love changing shape. Maybe that was what Maggie had meant too. Later, I went back to the garage and gathered the documents neatly. On the back of one, I began jotting down questions. What happens if a guarantor stops payment? Who owns partial rights if deed is joint? What does withdrawal mean legally? I didn't know the answers, but I knew someone who would. Peter Vaughn. We'd worked together decades ago at the firm before he became a lawyer, the kind of man who read every clause twice. As I packed the papers into a folder, I realized my hands were steady, not angry, not shaking, just certain. Outside, the night wind rattled the gutters. Across the street, Lauren's porch light flicked on, then off again. Maybe she'd stepped outside for air. Maybe she'd thought about calling me and changed her mind. Either way, I had mine made up. When I went to bed, I didn't dream of Maggie's laughter or Lauren's childhood. I dreamed of pen and paper, of signatures and consequences, of what it would mean to finally let the world see me, not as an old man waiting for forgiveness, but as a man reclaiming what he built. By morning, the snow had turned to slush, heavy and gray, the kind that makes every footstep sound like apology. I loaded the folder of documents into my truck, brushed the frost from the windshield, and started the engine. The radio came alive softly, an old station still playing carols. I'll be home for Christmas, of all things. I let it play. There was something poetic in the irony. The drive to town was slow, the roads half-plowed and slick. Every streetlight felt like a checkpoint of old memories. The hardware store where Lauren used to beg for peppermint sticks, the diner where Maggie and I had spent Saturday mornings splitting one order of pancakes. The world moves on, but it never forgets what it used to hold. Peter Vaughn's office sat in a modest brick building on the corner of Main and Fifth. The sign outside was weathered but dignified. Vaughn and Associates, Property and Estate Law. I'd known Peter for almost 40 years. We'd started together at the same engineering firm back in the 70s. He left after a decade, drawn to law school. I stayed and built houses until my hands stopped trusting ladders. He was the one who'd once told me, "Harold, the structure only matters if the foundation's honest." When I walked in, he was at his desk, reading glasses perched low, flipping through a stack of papers. He looked up and smiled. "Well, I'll be damned, Harold Benton. I thought you'd forgotten how to find civilization." "Civilization forgot me first," I said. He chuckled and motioned me in. "Sit. You look like a man with a folder that's either going to make my day or ruin it." I handed it to him. "Depends on how you look at justice." He opened the folder and began reading. Slowly, methodically. Every few pages he'd glance up with the same expression I remembered from the job site, the one that meant he was thinking faster than he wanted anyone to notice. After 10 minutes, he leaned back, folding his hands. "You've been paying part of their mortgage?" "On and off," I said. "When they fell behind. When Adrian's company restructured. I signed as guarantor. She said it was just a formality." Peter nodded. "A lot of parents do. Most live to regret it." I smiled faintly. "Guess I'm most." He leaned forward. "What do you want me to do, Harold?" "I don't want to hurt her," I said slowly, "but I want her to remember who built the ground she's standing on. If I withdraw my guarantee, what happens?" Peter exhaled, tapping the papers. "Technically, the bank would reclassify the loan. They'd freeze payments for review, maybe even call in a partial reassessment. That means stress, delays, embarrassment. Adrian's credit would take a hit." "Embarrassment sounds about right," I murmured. Peter studied me quietly. "You're not doing this out of spite, are you?" I met his gaze. "I'm doing it because I kept them safe too long, and I want to stop enabling their illusion of independence." He nodded once, understanding. "All right, I'll file the notice. It's within your rights. You'll just need to sign a statement confirming voluntary withdrawal." He slid a paper across the desk. I read it twice, the legal language cold but clean. Each word felt like a piece of steel being placed into a frame. I signed at the bottom, steady hand, no hesitation. Peter gathered the documents. "You're sure about this?" "I'm sure about finally being honest," I said. He smiled faintly. "You always did believe in structure, even when it's emotional." Before I left, he stood and shook my hand. "For what it's worth, Harold, this might be the most merciful revenge I've ever filed." "Mercy and revenge aren't opposites," I said. "They just speak different languages." Outside, the air had warmed enough to make the snow drip from the roofs. The sound was rhythmic, like time thawing. I drove home slower than before, not out of fear of ice, but to let the decision settle. When I reached my driveway, I saw Doris waving from across the street, her coat open, holding a broom she had no business using at her age. "You look lighter," she called out. "Maybe I am," I said. "Finally throw something out?" More like someone, she laughed. Good for you, Harold. Some clutter talks back, I smiled. This one sure did. That night, I sat by the fireplace with the papers sealed in an envelope. I wrote a note across the front, filed December 26th, for my own peace. Then I slid it into the drawer beside Maggie's music box. I turned the key once just to hear that familiar click. It wasn't closure yet, but it was the sound of a door finally locking in the right direction. The world looked different after a decision like that. Not brighter, not darker, just quieter. I woke to the kind of cold that seeps through the walls, the kind you feel in your bones before your mind catches up. When I opened the curtains, the whole neighborhood was buried under a new blanket of white. The street was still. Even the birds had taken shelter. It was the first Christmas morning I'd spent entirely alone. For the first time in decades, there was no voice calling me downstairs. No smell of cinnamon rolls. No sound of wrapping paper being torn open. Just the soft hum of the furnace and the creak of the house shifting under its own weight. I made a single cup of coffee and sat by the window. Across the street, Lauren's home was dark again. The party gone, the glamour spent. Only the porch light burned, steady but meaningless, like a reminder of everything temporary. I'd thought I would feel triumphant after signing those papers, but sitting there, I felt something else, the dull ache of doubt. What kind of father teaches a lesson this way? The question hung in the air like breath on glass. By noon, I couldn't stand the house anymore. I pulled on my coat, grabbed my gloves, and started the truck. The snow along the back roads hadn't been cleared yet, so I drove slow, following the tracks of whoever braved it before me. My hands trembled slightly on the steering wheel, not from the cold, but from the weight of wondering if I'd crossed a line I couldn't uncross. The cemetery sat just outside town, a quiet slope overlooking the frozen river. I parked by the gate and walked the rest of the way, my boots sinking deep with every step. Maggie's grave was near the old willow, the same spot she'd chosen years before she passed. The plaque was half buried in snow. I knelt, brushed it clean. "Morning, Mag," I said softly. "I know you'd scold me for not bringing flowers. You always said the living need color more than the dead." I stood there for a long time, unsure what I'd come to say. The wind blew gently across the field, carrying the faint chime of the church bell from town. "I did something," I began. "Something I think you'd call foolish, or maybe brave. I finally stopped paying for our daughter's comfort, pulled my name from the mortgage. It's going to hit them hard. Maybe that's the point." The air felt heavy, like it was waiting for a confession. "I keep telling myself it's not revenge," I said. "But I don't know. Maybe there's a thin line between teaching someone and punishing them. You were always better at telling the difference." A gust of wind lifted snow from the willow branches, scattering it like dust across the ground. For a moment, it looked like the world exhaled, and in that hush, I swear I heard her voice. Soft, low, exactly as I remembered it. "You can't heal what you hurt to prove a point, Harold." It wasn't real, not in the way sound is real, but grief has its own kind of physics. I closed my eyes. She shut me out, Mag. Pretended I don't exist. What was I supposed to do? Just sit here and let her forget me. The air stayed still. Then in the distance, a crow cried once, harsh and lonely. "Yeah," I whispered. "That's what I thought." I stayed there until the cold started biting through my gloves. Before I left, I pressed my hand against the stone, feeling the chill seep through my skin. "I don't know if this makes me a better man," I said, "but I know I can't keep being the kind of father who gets erased." On the drive back, the radio played static between songs. Somewhere around the bend near Mill Creek, the road curved sharply, and for a second, the sunlight broke through the clouds, a single shaft of light cutting across the snow like a ribbon. I slowed the truck and pulled over. I rolled the window down, letting the cold rush in. The light flickered on my hands, pale, trembling, human. I thought of Maggie's voice again, but this time it wasn't scolding. It was steady. Sometimes the lesson isn't for them, Harold. It's for you. I didn't answer out loud. I just nodded and let the silence take whatever that meant. When I got home, I placed a single photo of Maggie on the kitchen table, the same one from the graduation day. I lit a candle beside it, not for ritual, but for presence. Then I opened my notebook and wrote, "The hardest part of doing the right thing's wondering if it still makes you good." I stared at the line until the candle burned low, until the words felt like both truth and punishment. By evening, the sky had turned a bruised gray, that color between daylight and night that always reminds me of endings. Snow still covered the yards, but the roads had melted just enough for cars to move again. Christmas Eve. For most people, that meant light, laughter, and company. For me, it meant stillness, and a quiet kind of freedom I hadn't felt in years. I spent the morning cleaning the house. Maggie used to say, "If your mind's in pieces, scrub something, it helps." So I did. Wiped down the counters, polished the wooden banister, and cleared the dust from the piano she used to play. It wasn't music anymore, but the sound of the cloth on wood felt like rhythm. When I finally sat down, the house looked warmer, not lively, but lived in. The papers Peter had filed were tucked neatly in the drawer under the lamp. I glanced at them once, then closed it gently. The bank would process the withdrawal notice on the 26th. Until then, my silence was the only movement left to make. I decided to take a walk before dark. The air outside smelled of smoke and pine. From somewhere down the block, a family was singing off-key to Silent Night. It made me smile. The kind of small imperfection that used to make Maggie laugh. Across the street, Lauren's house stood quiet. No music, no guests. Only a few stray tire marks in the driveway, half filled with snow. Maybe they'd gone to Adrian's parents' home, or maybe the night before had taken enough out of them. I didn't wish them harm. I wished them truth. At the corner of Willow and Grant, I saw Doris standing near her porch steps, struggling to plug in a string of lights that refused to glow. "Need a hand?" I called. "Only if you brought patience," she said, shaking the cord. I walked over and knelt beside her. The plug was loose, barely hanging. I pushed it in, and the lights flickered to life, soft gold against the snow. "There we go," I said. She smiled. "You've still got the touch, Harold." We stood there watching the lights blink through the cold. "You doing anything tonight?" she asked. "Not much," I said. "Just keeping the fire going." "You should come by. I've got too much stew and not enough conversation." I hesitated. "Maybe tomorrow. I've got some thinking left to do tonight." She nodded like she understood more than I'd said. "Well, Merry Christmas, then." "Merry Christmas, Doris." When I returned home, the sky was nearly dark. I poured myself a small glass of whiskey, the same bottle I'd opened on the day Maggie passed. I sat in my chair by the window and let the fire do its quiet work. Around 9, I pulled out my notebook again. The last line I'd written stared back at me. "The hardest part of doing the right things is wondering if it still makes you good." I added beneath it, "Maybe doing nothing is the purest form of doing something." At 9:17, the phone rang. I almost didn't answer. The sound startled me, but something in my chest said pick it up. It was Adrian. His voice carried the tension of a man trying to sound calm while holding a burning wire. "Harold, evening." "Evening," I said. "You, happen to know anything about some issues with the bank?" I stayed quiet for a moment. "Issues?" He cleared his throat. "They're saying something about a guarantor change, that the cosigner has been withdrawn. There must be some mistake." "No mistake," I said. Silence. "Then you did this?" "I did." "Why?" His tone cracked between anger and disbelief. "Do you have any idea what this means?" "Yes," I said quietly. "It means you'll learn what independence actually costs." He exhaled sharply. "This isn't just about me, Harold. This affects Lauren, too." "I know. She's your daughter. She's also an adult, and adults pay their own bills." The silence that followed was thick enough to choke on. Finally, he said, "She'll be devastated when she finds out." "She's the one who stopped inviting me to devastation, Adrian. Don't act like I showed up uninvited." He tried to say something else, but stopped himself. Then the line clicked. I sat there, phone still in my hand, the firelight flickering across the walls. I wasn't angry. I wasn't triumphant. Just still. I poured another drink, set it down untouched, and went to the window. Across the street, the porch light of their house flicked on, then off, then on again, like someone was pacing near the switch. Maybe Lauren had heard. Maybe she hadn't. Either way, the first crack had appeared in the wall between us. I whispered toward Maggie's photo on the mantel. "Merry Christmas, love. You were right. Love does change its shape." The fire hissed softly, the logs collapsing into quiet embers. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel small inside my own home. I felt whole. The night outside was silent, except for the sound of the snow melting off the roof, a slow, steady rhythm that sounded almost like breathing. 2 days after Christmas, the snow had turned to ice. The road glittered under the morning sun like broken glass, beautiful and dangerous. I sat by the window, coffee in hand, watching the mail truck crawl down the street. It stopped at my mailbox, then at Lauren's. 2 envelopes went in, 1 came out. I knew which one mattered. The letter arrived just after noon. Plain white, bank logo in the corner, my name printed neatly across the front. Inside, a formal confirmation. This notice confirms withdrawal of guarantor from account Abusmal 148, Benton Property Holdings. Below it, smaller print, borrowers will be contacted separately regarding reassessment of loan terms. I folded it carefully, no anger, no pride, just the weight of something irreversible. Across the street, I saw Adrian step outside, still in his dress shirt, phone to his ear. His voice carried even through the glass. Sharp, clipped, the sound of a man trying to wrestle control from circumstance. He paced the driveway, one hand running through his hair. The cold wind bit through his confidence. Lauren came out, a few minutes later, barefoot on the porch, a coat thrown over her nightgown. She said something. I couldn't hear what. Adrian gestured toward their mailbox, shaking the envelope like evidence. She covered her mouth, then looked across the street. Our eyes met for the first time in months. It wasn't anger in her face. Not yet. It was confusion. Hurt. Maybe shame. She turned away before I could decide which. The day passed in fragments. Adrian's car left twice. Once in the morning, once after dark. Lauren stayed home. The house lights flickered on and off through the evening like a heartbeat that couldn't find rhythm. Around 7, someone knocked on my door. It wasn't hard to guess who. Lauren stood there, eyes red from crying, her coat buttoned wrong, hair damp from melted snow. She looked smaller than I remembered. "Dad," she said, her voice trembling. "What did you do?" I opened the door wider but didn't step aside. "Come in if you want to talk." She hesitated, then entered, the warmth of the house fogging her glasses. I led her to the kitchen table. She sat, fingers twisting the edge of her sleeve. "Adrian said the bank called him this morning. They froze the mortgage account. Said something about a reassessment. We could lose the house." "You won't," I said. "But you'll have to pay what it's really worth now." She looked up sharply. "Why would you do that to us?" "To you? Or to him?" Her voice rose. "To me. To your daughter." I stayed quiet, let the words find their own echo. "Finally," she said softly, "you wanted to punish him, and you're using me to do it." I shook my head. "I'm teaching you something your mother wanted you to learn. That love isn't a debt someone keeps paying for you. I gave you a foundation, Lauren, not a lifetime of maintenance." Her lip trembled. "You could have talked to me first. I tried. Years ago. You stopped listening." For a moment the room was silent except for the ticking of the wall clock. Then she whispered, You don't know what things have been like with Adrian's business. We've been under pressure. You embarrassed us." "No, Lauren," I said quietly. "You embarrassed yourself when you forgot where you came from." Her eyes filled, and for a second I thought she might shout. But she didn't. She just sat there, shaking, angry, ashamed, lost. Then she stood abruptly. "I shouldn't have come." "Maybe not," I said, "but I'm glad you did." She stopped at the door. "You've changed." "No," I said. "I just stopped apologizing." She left without another word, the door closing hard behind her. Through the window, I watched her walk back across the street, head down, shoulders hunched. When she reached her porch, she paused, turned slightly, maybe to look back, maybe just to breathe, and then disappeared inside. I stood there for a long time, the silence thick as snow outside. Then I whispered, "She'll understand someday, Mag, just not tonight." The fire in the living room burned low, the flames flickering like tired thoughts. I sat beside it, Maggie's picture on the mantel, the bank letter folded neatly beside the whiskey glass. It wasn't victory, it wasn't revenge, it was balance, cold, necessary balance. Somewhere deep inside, something uncoiled. The ache that had lived under my ribs for months began to loosen. Outside, the temperature dropped sharply. Ice formed along the eaves. The world had frozen solid, and yet for the first time in a long while, I felt thawed. By days after Christmas, the phone stopped ringing, and that silence was somehow louder than anything that came before it. Snow had hardened into ice along the sidewalks, dulling the world into shades of silver. I spent the morning mending a loose cabinet hinge, the kind of small job you do when you can't fix what actually hurts. Every squeak of the screwdriver echoed like a thought I didn't want to finish. By noon, I saw Adrian's car pull up fast, too fast, skidding slightly before halting in front of their driveway. He climbed out, slammed the door, and stood there for a moment with his hands on his head. From the window, I could see him talking to someone on the phone, gesturing wildly. His breath came out in clouds that vanished before they even reached the air. Lauren stepped onto the porch, arms crossed tight. They exchanged words, sharp ones from the looks of it. She tried to calm him, but he turned away, pacing. Then, without warning, he hurled the phone into the snowbank so hard it disappeared. I could have looked away, but I didn't. There's something about watching arrogance deflate. It's not satisfaction you feel. It's gravity. A few hours later, Doris came by, bundled in her usual overstuffed coat. She tapped lightly on my door and peered through the glass before I even had the chance to answer. "You've seen it too, huh?" "Hard to miss," I said. She sighed. "I heard from the postman. The bank's calling in a reassessment. Their payments doubled overnight. Apparently Adrian's been behind for months. This might do them in." I didn't say anything, just poured her coffee. "You don't seem happy," she said. "I didn't do it to be happy." "Then why?" "Because sometimes people only learn when the ground shifts beneath them." She nodded slowly, stirring sugar into her cup. "Maybe. But you look like a man who's realizing earthquakes don't choose what they break." Her words landed where she meant them to. After she left, I walked through the house, the quiet following me like a question I couldn't outrun. I ended up in the garage again, staring at the blueprint pinned to the corkboard. Lauren's house still perfect on paper, even as it crumbled across the street in real life. That night, around 8, someone knocked again. It wasn't Lauren this time. It was Adrian. He stood in the doorway, snow on his shoulders, eyes red-rimmed, his confidence stripped clean. He looked smaller, worn. "Harold," he said, his voice low. "Can I come in?" I hesitated, then nodded. "Wipe your boots." He did, a small gesture that felt heavier than words. He sat at the table, elbows on his knees, hands clasped. "I came to apologize." That was unexpected. He took a long breath. "I shouldn't have shut you out. I shouldn't have let things get this far. But you didn't have to do this. The house, it's all we have left of stability. The reassessment's killing us." "It's the same house you stood in front of and called yours," I said quietly. The same one you told people I sold and left behind. He flinched, shame flickering across his face. That wasn't... I didn't mean it that way. You did, I said. You just didn't expect the story to find its way home. He nodded slowly. I was proud. I wanted to look like I built something for Lauren. You built it all, and I... He stopped, swallowed. I was tired of feeling like the son you never had. That caught me off guard. The sentence sat between us, cold and raw. I didn't need another son, I said softly. I needed someone who wouldn't undo everything I built for her. He rubbed his face. She's been crying for days. She blames herself. She keeps saying she should have called you. She should have. He looked up. Can you undo it, Harold? Just help us get back on our feet? I'll handle the payments. I swear it. I stared at him. This man who had once smirked through his own success, now humbled by consequence. There was no pleasure in seeing him broken, only clarity. I can't fix what needed to break, I said finally. You'll either stand on your own or you'll fall. Either way, it's time you stopped using my name as a crutch. He nodded slowly at first, then stood. I guess I deserved that. Maybe, I said, but she didn't deserve the lie you made her live. He opened his mouth, closed it again, then left without another word. Through the window, I watched him cross the street, head down. When he disappeared inside, I turned back toward the fire. Maggie's photo sat on the mantel, faintly catching the glow. For the first time, I spoke to it without guilt. I didn't hurt them, I whispered. Life just stopped protecting them. Outside, the wind howled through the trees, carrying snow like shards of glass across the frozen road. The sound was eerie, cleansing, almost holy. I poured another cup of coffee and wrote in my notebook, sometimes the lesson isn't who suffers, it's who survives it. And I knew deep down that I had finally stopped being collateral in my own life. For the next few days, I barely saw movement across the street. The lights in Lauren's house stayed off longer than usual, curtains drawn, car unmoved. It was as if time itself had frozen inside those walls. Sometimes I'd catch sight of her silhouette through the blinds, sitting at the table, head in her hands, motionless for hours. I wanted to go to her. I didn't. You can't force someone to understand the lesson meant for them. On the morning of December 30th, a soft knock broke the quiet. Not frantic, not hesitant, just human. When I opened the door, Lauren stood there again. This time, no tears, no trembling, just exhaustion and something like humility behind her eyes. "Dad," she said softly. "Morning." She glanced past me into the house. "Can I come in?" I nodded. "You don't have to ask." She stepped inside, slow as if afraid of breaking the air itself. She looked around the living room, at the old recliner, at Maggie's photo on the mantel. Her eyes softened. "You still keep her close?" "Always." She smiled faintly. "I think about her a lot lately." "Good," I said. "She'd like that." We sat at the table, the same one she'd stormed away from a few nights before. The silence between us was thick, but this time it wasn't hostile. Just full. "I talked to the bank," she began. "They explained everything. We'll be okay. It's going to be hard, but we'll manage." "That's good," I said. She nodded. "Adrian's been looking for new contracts. I've started tutoring again. I forgot how much I used to love teaching." There was pride in her voice. Small, fragile, but real. Then she looked down at her hands. I wanted to say I'm sorry. For what? For forgetting. For making you feel like you didn't belong in the life you built for us. I didn't answer right away. Her voice cracked once, just enough to make me feel the weight of her sincerity. She continued, "When Mom died, I didn't know how to hold on to both grief and gratitude. Adrian filled the space she left, and I clung to him because it was easier than facing what I lost. But in doing that, I pushed you out. I thought distance meant independence. I was wrong." The words were quiet but clear. Each one landed where years of silence had left room. I reached across the table and took her hand. Her fingers were cold, but she didn't pull away. "You grew up," I said. "That's all I ever wanted. But you mistook walls for growth." She nodded, eyes glistening. "I know." For a long moment, we just sat there, the ticking clock between us like a metronome, keeping time for a new rhythm neither of us knew yet. Then she said, "Adrian's different now. He's scared, but humble. He wanted to come apologize too, but I told him not yet. I needed to face you first. That was the right choice. I also talked to Mom," she whispered, "at the cemetery." I froze, heart catching. "And what did she say?" She smiled weakly. "That you were right. That sometimes love has to be broken before it can be rebuilt." I looked at Maggie's picture then, her frozen smile watching over us, and felt something shift inside me. Not pride, not forgiveness, just relief. "You know," I said, "she used to say that about our porch swing, the one that always leaned to the left. She said, 'Harold, some things aren't meant to be leveled. They're meant to hold the shape of the people who use them.'" Lauren laughed softly, wiping a tear. "She really said that?" "She really did." We sat in silence again, but this time it was a good silence, the kind that didn't feel empty. Finally, she looked around the room. "You've kept everything exactly the same." "Some things remind you of who you were," I said. "That's not a bad thing." She nodded, her eyes tracing the framed photos on the shelf. Childhood summers, family dinners, Maggie's garden. "I want to bring some of these to the house, if that's okay." "It's your home, too," I said. Her lips trembled. "You still think of it that way?" I never stopped. She stood, walked around the room once, then came behind my chair and hugged me. Not the quick, polite kind of hug she'd given me in years past, but the real kind. The kind where two people hold on not to apologize, but to remember. "I love you, Dad," she whispered. "I know," I said, "and I never stopped loving you, even when you stopped looking back." We stood there like that. For a while, the clock ticking, the fire crackling, Maggie's picture glowing faintly in the light. For the first time in years, the house didn't feel old. It felt alive. When she finally left, she turned at the door. "You were right, you know." "About what?" She smiled. "About independence. It isn't built on money. It's built on gratitude." I nodded. Your mother would have said the same. And when she walked away, I didn't feel the hollow ache anymore. Only peace, the kind that settles in when everything that needed breaking has already been broken, and what's left is what was meant to stay. The morning after Lauren's visit, the house felt different, lighter somehow. The walls didn't hum with loneliness anymore. They just stood, quiet, sturdy enough. I brewed my coffee and set out 2 cups, out of habit. One for me, one for Maggie. It wasn't grief anymore. It was ritual. The difference matters. Outside, the snow was beginning to melt. Small patches of brown grass peeked through the white, like little proofs that winter doesn't last forever. For the first time in years, I didn't check my phone. Didn't look out the window toward Lauren's house. Didn't measure my day by who remembered I existed. I just lived it. I cleaned the kitchen, fixed the clock above the mantel, even played a few broken chords on the piano Maggie used to love. The sound was wrong, sharp and uneven, but it was something. Around noon, I opened the drawer beside my chair, the one that had stayed locked since Christmas Eve. Inside were the documents from the bank, neatly folded, and the note I'd written across the envelope. Filed December 26th, for my own peace. I took them out, placed them on the table, and stared at them for a long time. The paper had a way of reminding me how fragile control really is, how something as thin as ink and signature could reshape entire lives. Then I reached deeper into the drawer and found something else, a letter I didn't remember placing there. The paper had yellowed slightly, and the handwriting was familiar. Maggie's. My heart stopped for a beat. I unfolded it gently, afraid it might fall apart in my hands. Harold, if you're reading this, it means I'm gone, and you've started cleaning drawers you used to ignore. I hope you waited a few years. You always rush to fix things before they have time to breathe. I know you, my love. You'll want to hold on to everything, to protect, to control, to make the world behave. But life doesn't need you to build it. It needs you to trust it. Lauren will make choices that hurt. You'll want to rescue her. But sometimes love is not holding on. It's letting go with grace. You were a builder, Harold. Every wall you ever raised kept someone safe. But when I'm gone, you'll need to learn that not all walls are meant to stand forever. Some are meant to fall, so the light can reach you again. Love her, but let her stumble. It's the only way she'll find her own balance. And when that happens, don't build another house. Just open the door. She'll come home. The letter ended there. No goodbye, no signature, just that last line hanging like a prayer. I folded it carefully and placed it beside the envelope from the bank. 2 pieces of paper, one that closed a door and one that opened another. For the first time, I understood what Maggie had meant all along. Love wasn't maintenance. It was trust. That evening I went outside. The snow had turned to slush beneath my boots, the air heavy with the scent of thawing pine. Across the street, Lauren's house glowed softly through the windows. Warm, alive, no longer foreign. In the yard, the wind had knocked over one of her decorations, a wooden reindeer Maggie had carved decades ago. I walked over, lifted it gently, brushed off the snow, and set it back upright. Lauren must have seen me through the window. She appeared at the door, wrapped in a blanket. "Dad?" "Just fixing your mother's reindeer," I said. She smiled. "You never stop building, do you?" "Guess not," I said. She hesitated, then walked down the steps, barefoot despite the cold, and stood beside me. "Adrian and I are figuring things out," she said quietly. "It's not easy, but we're talking. That's what matters. I wanted to tell you, we're naming the new project after Mom." "Project," she smiled. "A tutoring center. For single parents. Free programs. Small classrooms. I've been thinking about what you said. About earning independence. Maybe I can teach that too." I couldn't speak. I just nodded, staring at her in the half-light. "She'd be proud of you," I finally said. Her eyes filled. "I hope so." When she went back inside, I stood there a while longer, the world quiet around me, the reindeer standing tall in the snow like a small monument to the woman who'd built us all. Back inside, I opened my notebook for the last time and wrote, "The walls I built kept them safe. The silence I kept made them listen. The lesson I gave wasn't punishment. It was inheritance." Then I slipped Maggie's letter inside the notebook and closed it. The fire crackled, the clock ticked, and the world felt aligned again. Outside, snow began to fall lightly, not the kind that buried things, but the kind that dusted them gently like memory. January came quietly. The snow melted off the roofs. The gutters began to sing again with the slow rhythm of thawing ice, and the neighborhood returned to its steady heartbeat. The holidays were over, and with them, the noise. But silence didn't feel like loneliness anymore. It felt like balance, the kind that only comes after a storm has passed and left everything in its honest place. I spent most mornings by the window, coffee steaming in my hand, watching the light move across the street. Lauren's house looked different now, not physically but in spirit. Curtains open, porch clean, music sometimes drifting through the air when she forgot to close the door. One morning I saw her sweeping the walkway, while Adrian loaded boxes into the truck. Not expensive boxes, no luxury furniture or gifts this time, just crates filled with books, chalkboards, and painted wooden signs. On one of them, written in neat white letters, I could read, "The Maggie Benton Learning Center." My chest tightened. A few minutes later, she noticed me at the window. She waved, smiling softly. I waved back. No words needed. There are some thank yous that live better in the air than in speech. Later that day, she came over again, not to apologize, not to cry, not to fix anything, just to share a cup of coffee. She sat at the table, her face calmer than I'd seen it in years. "We're opening next week," she said. "The center's small, just 2 rooms and a whiteboard that barely holds up. But it feels right." "It sounds like her," I said. She smiled. "Mom always wanted something that lasted longer than flowers." I nodded. "She built one. She just didn't know it." Lauren laughed quietly. I think she knew. We sat in easy silence. It's funny how time changes the definition of peace. It used to mean everything going your way. Now it means sitting across from someone you love and realizing they finally understand you. After she left, I went to the garage. The blueprints were still there, rolled, yellowed, fragile. I took them down one by one, stacking them on the workbench. All those houses I'd built for other people. All the plans drawn for lives I'd never live. At the bottom of the pile, I found one labeled in my handwriting. Benton Residence, Original Plan. My first house. My last. The one Maggie and I had built before Lauren was even born. I unrolled it across the table. The paper trembled slightly at the edges, curling from age. Maggie's notes were still scrawled in pencil along the margins. "Add window here. Make porch deeper. Don't forget mailbox." In the corner, her handwriting had faded, but was still legible. "A house is just wood and nails. A home is who stays when the doors don't lock anymore." I smiled. "You always knew how to outbuild me," I whispered. The afternoon light streamed through the garage window, landing directly across the blueprint. It glowed faintly, the paper alive in the quiet. I thought about how every line, every mark, every small measurement I'd drawn decades ago had led here, to a man sitting in a half-lit room, finally content with what couldn't be rebuilt. I took the blueprint and pinned it back to the wall, not as a memory, but as a promise. That evening, Lauren and Adrian came over for dinner. Doris joined us too, bringing her famous pot roast that could feed an army. The laughter was quiet, natural, unforced, the kind that fills a room without needing to echo. At one point, Adrian raised his glass. "To Maggie," he said, "for teaching us how to build something that lasts," I added, "and to learning when to let it fall." Everyone smiled. When the night ended and they all left, I stepped out onto the porch. The air was crisp, the stars scattered bright against the dark sky. Across the street, the light in Lauren's living room flickered out, but one lamp stayed on, the one near the window I'd once built with my own hands, the window Maggie had insisted on. "So she can always see you coming home," she'd said, and now, even after all this time, she could. I sat down on the porch step, the cold wood pressing against my palms, and let the quiet wrap around me. For the first time, I didn't feel like a man forgotten. I felt like a man remembered, not because I demanded to be, but because I finally earned the peace that comes when love is no longer a transaction, but an inheritance. The house creaked softly, the way it always did when it settled. This time, it didn't sound lonely. It sounded alive.